We've done 4 of these, and that's the first time I've managed to leave my audio on for that amount of time. Sorry about that. So to recap, my name is Luke, and I'm the Pervasive Media Studio producer. These talks are our chance to throw open the digital doors of the Pervasive Media Studio, and for you to hear more from the people who are part of our community or who are working on things that excite us. An especially big welcome to any of you who are new to the studio, for whom this might be the first time you'll be engaging with what we do. For all those newcomers, here's a little bit about what we do. So the studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creative technology and creativity and technology, with everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. We are a partnership between Watershed, University of West England and the University of Bristol. We're a home for early ideas and companies, and a meeting place of both creative and commercial industries. We offer studio space, desk space, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, and it's all for free. We are a safe place for artists to take risks in their practice and to make time for collaboration. Today's speaker is Marie Foulston. Marie is a curator and creative producer of radical exhibitions and experiences made in collaboration with video game designers and playful artists. She was the guest director of Now Play This in 2020, which some of you will know was launched in Animal Crossing. There's a Q&A at the end with the talk running around 35 minutes. If you want to ask any questions, just pop them into the chat window and I'll pick them out to ask Marie as we go. Please remember, you will need to be signed into a Google account or YouTube account in order to post in that chat window. After the talk is finished, a captioned and recorded version of the talk will be available here. Quick mention for next week's talk. Next week's talk is called I Heard It Through the Grapevine. And in the talk, studio residents Lily Green and Tim Kinberg will take you through how Grapevine works. It's a project they developed in the studio, and how you can get involved and give an honest insight into the process of transforming an R&D project into an inclusive company. You can get news on all our future talks by following us at PM Studio UK on Twitter and Instagram, or subscribing to our newsletter on our website. Please don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and give the video a thumbs up. The more subscribers we get, the more likes we get, and the more we can share stories like this. You can share this link whilst the talk is live as well. So please do share it now on your social media channels, and it will be available here to watch again when we're finished. If you've got an idea for your own lunchtime talk, you can give us a shout, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that when Marie is finished. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Marie Foulston.
Thank you, Luke. Hello. I made this sort of like little TV setup in the lounge that I'm in to try and hide the background, but looking at myself on the camera, I think I look a little bit like I'm about to give some Eurovision results, but that's not what I'm here to do today. So yeah, thank you for coming along and listening to this live or listening to this later. As Luke says, I am a playful curator, and I've worked curating events and exhibitions around video games, playful digital design for around about sort of 10 years or so now. So just to start off, that this talk is not one that I've given before. It's a talk that is about a lot of work which is quite contemporary or quite recent for me, and it's dealing with a lot of issues and thoughts that I guess I'm still sort of working through. So whilst this is very much obviously sort of a broadcast, I am thinking more about this as being something that is conversational. And it's something that I guess is going through some of my thoughts and various musings that I've had about where my head is currently at with regards to my work. So the talk is about curating playfully online. And I caveat that with the opening that whilst I work with video games and predominantly digital media, that I'm not an expert in curating online. I don't come into this work with a great deal of experience or knowledge in this space. And so for me, shifting my practice this way is something that hasn't just come out of response to sort of current circumstances, but it's something that's come out of necessity. And I think that's something that's important for me to acknowledge and sort of respect practitioners and artists who have been working in this field sort of for a long time, have been doing really radical work. So to start off, just a little bit about my background and about the work that I normally do, which, as I say, is about bringing video games, playful media, and playful arts work into public, real-world physical spaces. And that sometimes looks like, angry computer sound. Sometimes looks like this. Sometimes looks like this, or this, or sometimes looks like this, or sometimes looks like a car parked in the middle of the V&A. or this, or this, or this. So, so my work most recently, sort of work that I've done most recently, I was the guest director for Now Play This, which transitioned to Now Play This at Home this year, which is a festival of experimental play that takes place at Somerset House. I was also lead curator recently of the V&A exhibition, Video Games Design Play Disrupt. And I'm also one part of the UK-based experimental video game collective, World Rumpus. So yeah, so my work is normally about bringing video games and playful media into shared sort of real world public sites. And obviously, as people know, in March, that is something that a lot of my projects and a lot of my work for the year essentially collapsed or fell through. And I think that's something that obviously a lot of people are dealing with in a set of very serious and very complex circumstances. And as a curator whose work has been about bringing video games and playful media into shared public spaces, the absence or the loss of that context is something that's pushed me into, I guess, sort of kind of an existential space. And it's strange as somebody who is a curator of video games, who normally I question the video games part of that title much more than the curator part. But this is actually pushing me more to consider the former and to think about actually what is it about curation, what is it about bringing this work into those places has appealed to me, and why is this a space that I sort of exist in? Why is this work that I've been doing? Why do I feel so compelled to be in this space? And the absence of those spaces is pushing me to confront that on a much more fundamental level and to consider actually what is an exhibition. What are the spaces that I've been creating? And it's something that, as somebody who's against sort of working with video games, which are not necessarily medias or mediums that more commonly are associated with exhibitions or traditional public spaces, that my work has normally sort of swung between this idea of sort of the adoption of, but also the subversion of a lot of cultural constructs, such as the exhibition or the arcade. And I think it's work that I've often been doing without really sort of fully interrogating sort of why I've been doing it, or what that subversion or what that sort of adoption of those spaces means. And yeah, so that's sort of where I was finding myself. And as I'm assuming sort of a lot of other people whose work sort of sit in and practice exists in that context have been pushed into that same sort of mental space. And it's something that I guess sort of I've taken a step back from, and I think it's interesting sort of the spaces where those questions and conversations have taken me. And it's something that I think, again, sort of going back to the beginning where I'm saying that I'm not somebody who naturally works or has sort of really fully interrogated online exhibitions or online events. And I think for a long time, I'm somebody who has been quite skeptical of that work. And I caveat that as well with saying it is not because of the work of artists or creators who've been working in that space. I think it's often been because I've based my concepts of what online exhibitions are about these sort of quite reductive or quite stereotypical ideas. And for me as well, I think I'm somebody who I know I am very easily distracted. And an event or an exhibition or something that's taking place on my laptop might as well be taking place in the middle of a motorway. And there are so many things sort of passing me by. There's so many of the distractions and things that I could be doing. So sort of reflecting on what it's like for me to attend exhibitions or to attend events, it's strange that I've sort of found myself looking less towards sort of the work or the ideas that are necessarily presented in those spaces, but understanding some of the rituals or some of the frictions that exist around that. So when I'm attending an exhibition, like the sort of processes that I go through to get myself into that space, sort of that I will start off with planning, visiting an exhibition. I might discuss with friends if we're going to go. I might book tickets in advance. On the day, I'll get dressed maybe in a certain way, being conscientious of the environment that I'm about to go into. I will spend time traveling to that exhibition. I will commute there. When I arrive, maybe I'll put my bag in the cloakroom. And then when I enter as well, I find myself pushing myself to sort of focus or to consider the work and consider the environment around me in a very specific way. And I actively work towards that. And I notice that I have sort of behavioral changes. And that behavior, I still don't really know, is this learned behavior? Is this behavior that I want to embody in this space? Or am I partly role playing the sort of way that I know that we should inhabit galleries, sort of that slower pace, that sort of more intense focus? And more often than not, sort of, I can be in a gallery with friends, but mostly I'm still surrounded by strangers. And all of that sort of social context as well sort of really impacts my experience and the way that I behave within that space. And as somebody, as well as probably a lot of people who have been sort of getting into mindfulness in the past sort of couple of months, been taking up sort of meditation and realizing how much of those rituals that we undertake to get into an exhibition, and that sort of state of mind that we're in, that sort of focus attention we have within those spaces, sort of reminds me a little bit of this sort of meditation practice of bringing myself into a space to sort of act or embody ideas in a certain way. And so when I'm thinking about exhibitions and I'm thinking about these spaces, that on the one hand, I can sort of say, well, an exhibition is about sort of communicating ideas, it's about showcasing work. But actually, I find myself caught between this sort of, I guess, almost sort of like trifecta of thinking. It's, on the one hand, it is about the work and the ideas that are showcased, but it's also about this social experience. Maybe it's an excuse to be with friends, or it's a conduit to be with friends, or it's a conduit to be with strangers. And also it's one to be in a different environment, in a different sort of architectural space. And at the moment, with the absence of those spaces, that I'm finding it much harder to necessarily place one sort of above the other, or to see that there's a hierarchy that necessarily exists with those, that actually they're all intersecting and all there in different ways. And so I wanted to talk about some of the projects that I've been undertaking as my practice has moved into the virtual or into remote spaces, and use that as a way to talk through some of the ideas and some of the concepts that I've been working through or thinking about. So the first project that I wanted to speak about is something that was part of Now Play This festival. So as I mentioned, this is a festival of experimental games and play that was due to take place August 3rd to the 5th at Somerset House. So this year I stepped in as guest director for 2020. And in a regular year at Now Play this photograph in the presentation is a little bit more what Now Play This sort of looks like, that it's a sort of playful space with sort of an immersive and interactive works, and that bring people together in sort of a shared public space. So myself and the team have been working on the festival since November 2019, and then facing sort of a similar situation to a lot of people, a mere weeks before the festival was due to take place, we made the sort of complicated and difficult but incredibly sort of necessary decision to cancel the festival. And so the festival this year looked a little bit more like this. So here you can see the festival team. You can see the production team of Sophie Sampson, of Joe Summers and Nick Murray, who are the team that I worked with, both on the physical incarnation at the festival, but also in translating it to the digital. So we made the decision after cancelling the festival or postponing the festival to instead look at creating in its stead a virtual or a digital festival, something that would happen remotely and online. And we had 2 weeks to pull this together and to make that transition. So, but it was something that I think that we did still give ourselves. And one of the first things that we did as a team was give ourselves a bit of breathing space and to give ourselves a bit of time to really think about what is Now Play This? What are the essential qualities of this festival that are important? Because we knew that the festival that we had curated and created for a entirely different context and different space is not something that we could copy directly over into the virtual space or into digital spaces. That the festival needed to be allowed to change and it needed to be allowed to transition to actually embody sort of a virtual space and to make use of that and to find its own meaning and its own value. And so whilst we knew the festival had to change, we knew that there were essential elements of the festival that we wanted to retain, that was important to us, that still persisted. And so we did a bit of sort of soul searching and thinking about sort of what that is. And I think the three sort of key elements that sort of really, I guess, sort of felt to us as though they're at the heart of the festival is one, this is an interactive festival. It's one that is participatory and that people and visitors have an active role in when they visit and when they experience the festival. It's also a conversational festival. It's not about community. It is about bringing people together and fostering meaningful connections. And that can be between sort of friends and families and creative communities, or it can be fostering meaningful connections with strangers. And lastly, that Now Play This is also a festival that embraces experimentation, and that this should be a space for us to explore different and new ideas and new work, and to not be afraid to try to fail as well, to try some new things. So what I'm not going to do is sadly go into all of the details about sort of every event that we did as part of Now Play This, or all of the sort of technical aspects of that festival. If you're interested in finding out more, then we do have a blog post online which talks about that work. And Nick Murray, the festival producer, has been doing a fantastic job sort of tweeting reflections and tweeting some of the work that was due to be part of the festival. But instead, what I'm going to do is just talk about sort of two of the events that we undertook as part of Now Play This, and that is specifically the virtual field trips. So the concept of the virtual field trips is something which was directly inspired for me by an article that Everest Pipkin wrote back in 2016 that talked about their experiences visiting art and meeting with artists in Second Life. And Everest's writing is something which has stayed with me, as did her writing, or their writing specifically about their experiences going on tours of Second Life with the artist John Rathman, who you can see here, who used to do these tours sort of dressed as, or embodying sort of the avatar of the Kool-Aid Man. And as I say, sort of that writing and the thought of those virtual field trips of going into a space with people and having this very active and interactive experience and treating the virtual world almost as though we would sort of an art gallery or a historical landmark or a tourist destination was incredibly evocative to me. And so that was specifically the point of reference that I had in sort of looking towards recreating and continuing exploring this idea of creating virtual field trips. So one of the first sort of field trips that we did was with Robert Yang, and this was a tour that he undertook in Second Life, not in Second Life, undertook it in Half-Life, the other life, not the second one, but the half one. In a Half-Life 1 through a mod called Sven Co-op that allowed for multiplayer and multiple players to be within sort of Half-Life 1 and sort of experience the Black Mesa research facility together. So for these field trips, there's a couple of sort of considerations and I guess sort of complexities that we had to confront in planning them. And this is that these, as festival events, were going to be time bound. So it would have to occur at a specific certain set time. It was an event that, if you were participating, would require your full attention. You were entering into an active first-person shooter game, and so if you're not paying attention, for one, you're not going to be able to keep up, but also you're probably going to die. So it required the full attention of the people participating. We also knew that it would have limited audience capacity because, for one, even within a digital space, a certain sort of sense of community will break or will radically change if you have an increased or exponential amount of people occupying that space. And we wanted to retain the idea of, and the same feel of being on a field trip or being on a tour. So we knew that it was going to limit audience capacity. And equally, the train in the beginning of Half-Life that the players have to travel within, I think Robert said, actually would only have the capacity to physically fit about 9 people. So there's limitations even within sort of the digital space. And so I think it's something that with these restrictions and these limitations, that for me, it talks about this idea that we have perhaps about the digital being this sort of entirely accessible space, of being something where we can do away with some of the physical limitations of the real world. We're not perhaps limited by the amount of people who can attend a talk. We're not limited by geographical region. And so in theory, they could technically reach more audiences, but what do we lose and what changes when we do that? And I had a really great conversation with Angela Washko talking about her practice in World of Warcraft and in various sort of online spaces, hosting interventions and exploring those spaces. And she referred to it as sort of this idea of like this digital fallacy of sort of accessibility. So when we were creating these events, we knew that we were sort of restricting the amount of people who could attend. And that's still something that we know that we have to be conscientious of. But it's something that I think for me sort of speaks back to this idea of those rituals of what is happening when you attend a real world exhibition or when you go to an event, that actually these are not direct comparisons with the frictions and with the realities of what it means necessarily to go to a real world exhibitions, but they are counterparts, that they are connected. And in a way, sort of, for me, it helps create or potentially evoke that same sense of reverence that we have within physical spaces and that we have within different constructs. So now what I'm going to do is just play you a short clip from the, actually I'm not, Martin is going to play you a short excerpt from the video of Robert Yang taking the tour group. And this is from the excerpt where they're visiting the bathrooms in the Black Mesa Research Facility.
Let's see. And if you're able to crouch, I encourage you to try to crouch and peer underneath these stalls. You'll notice two pairs of legs. There are two people in these bathroom stalls. And I believe if you try to use these doors the first time, they'll yell at you and say the stalls are occupied, or maybe not. I don't remember. But let's respect their privacy, I guess. But also, just check out the very tight seams between these door panels. It's very hard to get a peek in through these stalls either.
You can see their heads if you jump at the right angle.
Oh, yeah, so let's all feel free to try to jump at the right angle to see.
You can stand on me.
Each other up so you can peer over the stall as well. But that's the bathroom. Does anyone have any last bathroom questions before we move on? And if anyone needs to use the bathroom, I'm sorry, all the stalls are occupied. So you'll just have to pee into this trash can. It's America. I mean, rubbish bin. It's a rubbish bin, sorry. Okay, let's continue. Let's walk over here to the other side of the locker room. Please follow me.
So that is Robert Yang and a tour group of about sort of 15 or so people, not respecting the privacy of the NPCs in the bathrooms at the Black Mesa Research Facility. And just to know as well how, I'm amazed at how well Robert Yang really embodies the characteristics of a tour guide as well, just the polite pausing and asking any more questions about the bathroom. Yeah, so the second virtual field trip that we undertook was a landscape photography tour of No Man's Sky. And this was a tour that was led by Gareth Damian Martin, who is somebody who has done a lot of work around sort of photography in video games, and also talks a lot about architecture in video games. And so whilst Gareth has hosted workshops and photography workshops in video games before, that has normally occurred within physical sort of real world settings. And this was the first time that Gareth had actually undertaken this work within an entirely sort of virtual environment, or doing one that is entirely sort of remote with different people. So this workshop has, this is a workshop, and it has a very, but a different tone to that of Robert's. But I just wanted to play a quick sample as well from Gareth's really beautiful tour. This was the last event that we did as part of Now Play This at Home, and it was a really sort of perfect way to finish. But I'll just leave you with a quick clip of Gareth laying out the assignments for the spacemen who were on that workshop.
So I think I'm going to stay up here so I can see you all. You don't necessarily have to follow me up here, but you can. So I think we're going to do a kind of assignment, maybe, from here, which is to use photo mode to make, I'm going to call it making an inquiry, but you could call it I don't know, an investigation of this landscape. Now, that might be you might be interested in the wildlife, right? And the behavioral patterns of the wildlife. You might be interested in those weird glowy minerals. You might be interested in that big globe thing that I just triggered, and photographing that in context, or I'm like, we'd be interested for people to think beyond maybe the like the kind of traditional photographic, but like you can also do it, you know, you could try and recreate science fiction covers. But I'm gonna give you all like a 3-image portfolio to present. So if you come back to me with 3 images, which represent like your inquiry, and if anybody wants to kind of like talk through their idea with me, I'm just going to hang out on top of this cliff and watch you all running around. And if you want to bring somebody, if you want to talk to somebody else and get them to pose for you, or you want to use a boats or anything like that, or like bring in ships or build a base, like feel free to do that. But I'm also not going to give you like 2 hours, so don't get too ambitious. But does that all make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah. Well, have at it. I'm gonna, let's say.
Oh, computer's making an angry sound again. There we go. So yeah, so that was not Robert, that was Gareth on the leading the photography landscape workshop in No Man's Sky. And as you say, it has a very different sort of feel and tone to sort of Robert's tour, but something that is equally sort of evocative. And I think they both do such a great job of embodying the roles. And I have to say, as somebody who wasn't taking part in the No Man's Sky workshop, that I got this kind of pain or anxiety in my stomach hearing him sort of calling out for people to do homework, because I felt a little bit like a kid who'd forgotten to do a homework assignment or something. So so I definitely really felt the pressure of that experience. But the thing that I think is interesting about these events, or one of the things that's interesting, is just how they both embody sort of these familiar feelings and these familiar experiences, but also something that is so different and new. And there's sort of this sort of strange sort of, they're often sort of strange, and there's this sort of like hilarity that comes out of these experiences. And there's moments in Robert's tour where there's MP, or the various people are dying in the lifts as they're going up. So it's like, what kind of sort of tour guide lets its visitors sort of die in the lifts as they're being taken around? And also there's a really great moment at the beginning of Gareth's workshop where he just stops at the beginning and pans around to show people how he's being chased by this herd of spacemen who were chasing him across this planet, and just sort of how sort of strange but and hilarious and sort of odd those moments are. And again, it's something that I'm interested in sort of understanding, and I'm somebody who's never really had to think about sort of that connection before in regards to exhibitions or context, about the way in which public spaces, real world public spaces and virtual spaces intersect and how they connect with each other. And there was a piece of writing that was done by Michael Connor from Rhizome recently, which was talking about curating online exhibitions. It was the first part of an ongoing essay series. And this article is something which is everything as somebody who is a novice in this space really desperately wanted to read at the moment. And it touched upon so many issues and so many sort of thoughts that I've been having, and touched on this. And one of the things that he talks about in this is talking about the way that sort of digital spaces and sort of public real world spaces are neither sort of fully connected or fully disconnected. And I've just highlighted one of the quotes from that article here, which talks about sort of the fact that these are neither distinct and they're neither sort of fully connected, but the fact that they sort of bounce off each other, and you have these familiar feelings and familiar experiences sort of reverberating and bumping up against these sort of entirely new ones. And so I do have as well sort of a reading list that I'll be able to share from some of the various articles if you want to sort of go and read these works afterwards. And so moving on to the second project that I wanted to talk about that I'd undertaken in recent weeks. And that is something not entirely different, but slightly different, which is a party in a shared Google Doc. Pedantics on the internet might know that it was not a party in a shared Google Doc. It was a party in a shared Google Sheets, but meh. So it was a party in a shared Google Doc in a Google Sheet. This was the wonderful advert that, or party invite that I created and shared with my friends and shared online. So this was an event that took place on May the 2nd with a dress code that everybody come as anonymous animals. So where did this come from? I guess sort of as an idea. And I think part of it was sort of a response to, for me, sort of the fact that so much of the tools of our work life and our tools for us are sort of transcending and merging into our social experiences now. And there's something quite absurd about that. And that's something that I wanted to be able to explore or sort of plummet that absurdity just a little bit deeper. But also as somebody in regards to social experiences who, and I think most people have noticed this as well, is that Zoom and video conferencing can be incredibly exhausting, that it's a way of sort of boiling down interaction and being together into this sort of very basic concept of staring at each other's faces and listening to each other's voices. And I don't really know when else I communicate with people in that way. And perhaps sort of in meetings or maybe in job interviews, but it is definitely not sort of the way that I interact socially. Even if I was at a restaurant with somebody, that there's some context or ritual that's around me, like I can stare at the menu for 10 minutes and we can do that in silence. And so for me, it was about also sort of how I was missing some of the quiet spaces and the liminal spaces that happens when people are together. Sort of this idea of sort of catching someone you know at the corner of your eye, or having an awkward conversation with a stranger when you're waiting for the bathroom at somebody's house. And also just sort of understanding different ways of feeling someone's presence that is not about sort of staring at their face or hearing their voice, but simply about knowing which cell of a spreadsheet they've clicked on. And just to sort of say, so I'm by no means the first person to attempt something social or creative in a spreadsheet. Since sort of talking about this and posting this online, various people have got in touch with me and shared other parties that they've done historically. And there's also other events which have been inspired by this. And so it's really interesting to sort of subvert, for me to sort of subvert and adopt these sort of spaces for different contexts. But really sort of echoing sort of Michael Connor's point that having a party in a spreadsheet is not necessarily something that is completely devoid from the context of being in a spreadsheet, that the party in the spreadsheet knows it's in a spreadsheet, but it's also trying to subvert being in a spreadsheet at the same way. And so it's this strange sort of interplay and connection. So the first thing that happened at the party was that everybody congregated in a hallway. And so one of the things that you can't do with Google Docs or Google Sheets is if people are coming in through an anonymous link, they cannot use the communal chat function. And at first I thought this was going to be a problem for the party because people would not be able to identify themselves and be able to communicate. But instead, it was something that we just sort of leaned into and saw where that take us. And so one of the first things that people were attempting was to identify and know which anonymous animal they'd come as, like who they had arrived at the party dressed as. And so you have this hallway spreadsheet of sort of these cells just quickly filling with different conversations and different people sort of announcing their names and saying who they are and demanding to know sort of which animal am I. And this sort of shared sort of playful sort of almost game-like experience that was happening. And so the party shifted from the hallway and into the kitchen. And here's sort of people cut and pasted some Percy Pigs. Thank you, whoever did that. If you know me, then you know that I'm a big fan of the extended Percy Pig cinematic universe. Somebody brought some mysterious punch, to which I responded by putting out some clean ASCII cups for people to take away. And so in these spaces, well, one of the things that I found really strange and odd was that is the way that conversations and communication happened, because without a shared sort of space or without sort of space that retains your identity, that actually conversations and what you say only belongs to one person or only belongs to whoever is saying it in the exact moment that it's being typed. As soon as you click away, all of the talk, all of these conversations merge into one. And when you look back at those conversations and when you read through them, that actually there's no way of knowing really who said what to who and when. And so it's this strange sort of abstraction where you're reading this and trying to decipher like, so what the conversation was about, how many people are talking, who's speaking to who, and also just sort of how strange it is to talk to somebody and try to communicate with someone without knowing if they're a really good friend or if they're a total stranger. That how do you hold yourself and what do you say, what language do you use, and what conversation do you have if you have no social context for who you're speaking to? And I think something that both myself and other people attending this noticed is that actually, even within a spreadsheet, a lot of the anxieties and complexities of being at a party sort of actually still persist. And so here I found myself during the event sort of clicking from sheet to sheet, wondering, is everybody congregated in the backyard? Is everybody having more fun somewhere else? And whilst there's that anxiety, and whilst that sort of common, we think of that as being a negative feeling, it's something at the moment that feels like it's an experience that I have an absence of. And so being able to live that or understand this in this radically different context feels like this sort of sense of gently exercising or reminding myself of a context or an experience that is sort of temporarily absent. And so as the evening went on, sort of that behavior and the things that people did in the spreadsheet sort of changed, and there became this sort of more emergent playful behavior. And the very last space that people were congregating sort of towards the end of the night was in a paint by numbers sheet that had been created, and people were using the conditional formatting to allow people to paint using numbers. And it felt like entering into sort of like a quiet arts and crafts space where nobody's really talking in here, but all you can see is these cursors clicking around and different colors going in, and you're sort of wondering what shapes and what things people are going to create, and sort of watching somebody create a house or a rainbow. And it was really interesting as well just to see people create different rules and create different games and create different experiences within a spreadsheet, and that you were using the constraints and you're using the language and the possibility, the potential of that space in very different ways that we do not normally allow ourselves to experience. And so in some of the readings that I've been trying to do to try and understand sort of this idea of feeling presence and sort of being with other people in these spaces, that I came across this writing, The Cyborg's Dilemma. And again, if people know this stuff, they're probably shouting at me, like, this is a seminal text, or why are you reading this for? But I'm new here. So but this is one I was reading, which is A Cyborg's Dilemma, Progressive Embodiment in Virtual Environments. And this is an article that's written, or writing that was written in 2006. And so a lot of it is really sort of heavily sort of leaning towards sort of virtual reality and embodiment, which is still quite a literal sort of translation of sort of the sort of physical experience of sort of the body and the way that it moves. But there's still something in here that that really resonated with me, which again is this idea of understanding the body as this sort of communication hardware, as understanding this as sort of the user interface through which we communicate and discuss with people. And so many of the tools that we have that were created, I think, are trying to understand this in this really literal way, which is not fully understanding sort of that we do not necessarily have to create these direct literal translations of communication. And actually, we can explore things which are more abstract or more speculative. And in those spaces, we can find experiences that are both incredibly familiar, but also incredibly new, and sort of that these strange sort of connected cousins of the way that we communicate. And for me, that is what I'm interested in with things such as communicating and existing socially in a spreadsheet, is understanding how these different abstract ways of communicating and these different tools that have been created for different contexts can be repurposed to help us understand different ways of being together and feeling connected and feeling embodied. And just to sort of end on as well, that there's a few other sort of events and experiences that sort of are connected to video games, which have been happening online, which I think for me really touch on a lot of these similar sort of questions and things that I'm interested in. This sort of idea about frictions, about constraints, about abstractions, about sort of creating these spaces that allow for emergent behavior in sort of quite unexpected ways. And so one of those is Like Online, which is a gallery video game that was created by Paolo Pedicini, which is an online sort of recreation of his real world gallery, Like, which is in Pittsburgh. And it was this, for me, sort of one of the most sort of evocative experiences that I've had online during sort of during this period. And so I really strongly recommend sort of following to see if there's any further installations of that, or equally just sort of reading up some of the notes and discussions that he's posted. That and the follow-on exhibition, Oma, I think it is also online, so you can go and visit that. And another one as well, which if you've been paying attention, I don't know how bad the video is, but I've been wearing this exhibition as my outfit during the talk. But this was an exhibition that I went to very early on in the release of Animal Crossing, and it was an exhibition hosted by Stephanie Unger on her island. And I know probably everybody's rolling their eyes and everybody's a little bit sick to the teeth of Animal Crossing, apart from myself and the people that play it. But there is something so incredibly fascinating that is going on with the nature of digital communities and embodiment and presence within Animal Crossing, and being able to get up on a Sunday morning at sort of 9 o'clock and be able to travel to this island where only 8 people can be at any one time, and knowing that I'm surrounded by strangers, and knowing the person that stood next to me is somebody somewhere out there who's pushing a controller and looking at stuff. And the way that people role play in these environments as well, to sort of embody and pretend about that experience of this is what it's like to be in a gallery, that there was something that was happening in that space which I thought was really wonderful, where people had figured out that if they launch the in-game sort of typing or keyboard, that it actually makes their character put their hand to their chin, which makes you look like you're contemplating the art. And so people were sort of stood around and doing this during the gallery. But there's a lot of writing about Stephanie's exhibition online, so I really encourage you to sort of see that. And there's a whole host of other people as well that have done similar things in Animal Crossing, and a whole history of similar stuff as well that's happened in previous incarnations. Shout out to Ica from Ica Village from Animal Crossing New Leaf, which is a personal favorite. In summary, in conclusion, this is, oh yeah, by the way, this is me in one of my other projects that I did during lockdown, which was recreating Factory of the Sun in Animal Crossing. So this is also my work and my practice. But yeah, so forgive me that as somebody who's got her head deeply entrenched in video games, that forgive me a little bit of sort of exceptionalism when I talk about this, and this is probably true of other creative disciplines, but I think for me what is so unique about, well, not unique, but so special about the ability to work with video games in the current sort of climate and with sort of social experiences. And the reason why I think that video games designers and people who are used to working with games and play are in a really sort of great position to be able to explore different ways and meaning of being together. And I think this is also true as well of sort of the conditions of net artists and stuff, that we're not working with the same sort of constraints of usual sort of digital design. That video games is a medium that sort of many people consider to be sort of this aesthetic form of systems. It's this sort of bringing together of sort of emotions and engineering. You have this subjective design and this objective design, and this sort of the fantastic tension that's sort of where those 2 points meet. The video games are not necessarily driving towards efficiency. We're not trying to create digital systems or services or platforms that are the most efficient ways of getting things done. That actually it's a way of exploring emotion and experiences and responses and aesthetics through the digital. And there's a really great talk as well by Naomi Clark talking about broken video games, which again is in the list of reading materials that I'll circulate afterwards, which is talking about the fact as well that video games are allowed to be broken. There's allowed to be a little bit of dirt in your diet, because in those gaps where systems are broken, or when you're in a spreadsheet that's not efficiently designed for a party, or when you're in these other spaces which are not quite a right fit, that it gives space to players, it gives space for co-creation, it gives space for something new to develop, and for people to bring themselves and to put themselves into that work. And I think that's for me what's really valuable about being somebody who's engaged with games and play at this time, is that it allows you to not necessarily focus on being super efficient, but it gives you the perhaps sort of the leniency or the ability to let yourself sort of sit somewhere between the practical and the absurd. And I think at this current time, as a curator and as anybody else, that's probably as good a place as any to be. And that is me done. And now it's very odd because there's not a room full of people going polite, clap, 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 clap. But that's it. Instead, I've got you, Luke.
Thank you, Marie. That was sensational. We've got some questions already coming through. And please, if you want to show some applause, you can do the two-handed clap symbol into the chat window, and we can all see the digital rapture for Marie's excellent talk there. So first question that we have is from Lucy Bailey, who says, I love the idea of finding liminal spaces online. Did you set instructions or frame the party on Google Doc for people participating? And if you did, how did you do this?
Yeah, I didn't know what the etiquette was for how much you should set the context for a party in a spreadsheet, but even in titling the event, you set a context and you set some constraints. So even in me saying it's a party in a spreadsheet evokes a certain sense of behavior, and sort of sets the tone for how people are going to sort of role play, or how people are going to act in that space. In terms of things that I set out, I created a front door page which had some instructions, which were just sort of one saying, look, people, you're free to create anything you want. Feel free to sort of edit anything. So I didn't want to put constraints on sort of what people could or couldn't do. I told them to cut and paste their coat, I think, in the coat room, because that was one of the only other rooms. So I created 2 rooms. I created a dance floor, which was just black with like some cells colored. So that was my dance floor. And I created a coat room, which was just a tab with a coat cut and pasted in it. And so I think those sort of set the tone for going forward. I was incredibly conscious, as I think a lot of people are, about creating or letting that space be entirely public or entirely open, because I have no idea how you moderate a party in a spreadsheet. And so it was something that I kept sort of attendance or access to it limited to people who were friends of myself or mutual friends of friends. So that was sort of a way of, I guess, sort of hoping to sort of safeguard against any sort of unwanted sort of behavior. But I think in naming a party and in doing those small things, it definitely sets people on a certain path. And that was something I was conscious of from the beginning. But beyond those sort of 3 sheets, that sort of the freedom and flexibility to create was sort of left open to people.
I mean, that kind of neatly segues into the next question, which is like, did you have any, it's from Freya Campbell, and they say, did you have any problems with griefing or poor behavior in the Google Doc? And maybe just for some of the people who might not know what griefing is, if you could explain what that is first, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, again, sort of, I mean, I guess sort of griefing, that I guess in a sense that having people who are intentionally coming in to cause chaos or havoc or to say offensive or abusive things. And I am incredibly conscious about that happening, which again was why I specifically created the space as one in which was only sort of accessible by a certain group of friends. It's something that I've spoken to other people as well about how they've dealt with that with other spaces. And so I think it's something that if I was ever looking to expand that or to create sort of a larger version, that is something that I would definitely want to have sort of a code of conduct, and I would want to have a way of knowing sort of, okay, how do you police this? How do you sort of, because also spreadsheets can be infinite, like you can't necessarily have all eyes everywhere at once. And so so I think there's a lot to think about with regards to safety in those spaces, which again is why and I think there's a whole separate conversation that can be had about sort of the size and scale of different communities. And it's something that I think perhaps is reflected as well in the fact that for this, and even for sort of the stuff we did as part of Now Play This, that we intentionally limited the communities and we intentionally sort of limited the people who could come into that space. So for the field trips as well, there were things which were also broadcast on Twitch, because it was something that we knew we had the capacity to be able to make them accessible to people who might not be able to access them directly. But during sort of the early conversations, we thought, well, should we reach out? Should we try and get these promoted? Should we sort of promote these in different places? But for us, we wanted to actually keep the conversation sort of more manageable, and that to us was more important than the numbers. And so I think that's one aspect for it. But I think there's a lot to be said, and it's a lot of things that I'm also dealing with regards to other projects, is thinking, how do you create code of conduct? How do you keep, how do you have sort of policies that you can put in place, and have sort of actionable protocols that you can put in place for online communities, because it is just as important in virtual spaces as it is in physical spaces.
Now, I don't think Marie can see the chat window where the questions are, but she's doing an excellent job of segueing from question to question, because the next question is, have you seen in the things you've done, or maybe perhaps this is kind of a future question, did you see the emergence of new social conventions across the different platforms? Like, is that, if so, like what way are they similar or different per space? I mean, that's quite a big question, but like it's interesting to think about how this is all evolving and changing, right? Like,
I feel like a researcher. Report back your findings. What new emergent behaviors? Well, we went out and we discovered this. I don't know what I could say is new, because again, none of these things that I have done are things that have not been done before. So things like the virtual field trips are things which are inspired by others. Things like the spreadsheet is more an idea that actually quite a lot of people have also reached that same stupid idea as I did. There's ones that I can reflect on that feel new to me. And one is just sort of, and it's sometimes hard, like I find myself trying to sort of find like, what's the real world equivalent of this? What's the real world equivalent of this? Like, how does this connect? And thinking, do I need to? Is it okay just to let them sort of exist? But I think I'd reflect back on what I was talking about in the spreadsheet, just that when you are having a mass conversation with people, and all the things that you have said are just morphing into the same voice, and time is lost, and identity is lost, and social context is lost. And that is something that I'm finding really hard to find. Like, okay, what are the real world experiences that I have that relate to this? Like, I mean, what would the equivalent be like being in a your conversations are recorded and they linger in the air as well. So that, and also the absence of identity as well when you're speaking to people, was something that was really strange, when the only thing that you've got to go on is, well, that person's got an orange bounding box and mine is blue. And there was other stuff as well, sort of within the field trips, like just again, sort of the absurdity of different behavior, sort of with sort of movements. Like when you're watching that Robert Yang sort of video, and you're watching, everybody's like they're fidgeting so much, nobody's standing still, everyone's jumping around and hopping about, and you're like, stand still. But it's because I'm trying to force that real world equivalent, so it's trying to see it as a real world space. And then there's something really interesting to explore with sort of movement in those spaces as well. But yeah, so I think I'd really be hard pushed to say any of it is new, but I can say I could probably speak to stuff that's new to me, and sort of trying, and I'm still working through, like, trying to unpick, like, what does this mean, and what does this connect to, and who's written about this before, and where is the theory on this, which I'm sure must exist.
I mean, one question that's definitely come up for me is like how we are moving a lot of things online, right? We've moved these lunchtime talks online in a way that's very new for us as well. But I wonder what there is about the invitation prior to joining, like, and how you craft that and how you feel about that. Mm-hmm. Because I think possibly the knee jerk is send a Zoom link, or, you know, like, but what we think always about the marketing and immersion of the beginning of someone entering an event. Yeah. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's like, it's something that I'm thinking about, and again, it sort of perhaps goes back a bit to the field trips a bit more, like this idea as well, that sort of you have in immersive entertainment, and especially with VR, like this idea of onboarding. When you come to an escape room, or if you come to a theme park and you're in the queue, like, how do you build people up to that experience? And that happens in a lot of real world sort of context, just naturally through the experience. Whereas again, sort of a lot of things that are happening digitally, if it's just a click away and it's always there, like, I find it much harder personally to have that same reverence, or to put that same sort of value on that work. And so I think it's really interesting to think about what onboarding is for digital experiences, and for virtual remote experiences, and for the virtual field trips. Like, a lot of the stuff that we could think about as being onboarding could think about stuff that actually makes those events sort of less accessible for people, because you have to be able to book a ticket, and you have to be free at the time, and you have to turn your computer on, and you have to download some software. And all the stuff as well that we did before the field trips, like we had a Discord as well for people to come and congregate in. So people were asked to turn up half an hour beforehand, so they came to the Discord beforehand. People were checked to make sure that that we could hear them, that people could move around in the game okay. In No Man's Sky, Gareth and Sophie and the team had to do a lot of work to think, how do you actually get people to lots of online multiplayer to a specific location? So there's all of these sort of frictions and all of these things that you have to do to get people into that. And I think they can be seen as a pain in the ass, but actually they also evoke something in us, which I think sort of, again, sort of helps bring us into that mindset of valuing those experiences. And so I think it would be a lot of fun to sort of, like, I love queues in theme parks that just really go alpha leather in getting you into that space. And I would really love to like really dig into that and just be like, actually, let's just build the whole experience through all of that as well. Like, we're going on a field trip, why don't we make it a travel agents? Why don't we brand it this way so that it sort of builds that experience out? But which is something I've not done yet, but yeah.
Great. Harrison Wilmot says, have you heard of a blockchain/NFT online social space called CryptoVoxels?
No.
There's been some well, apparently there has been some emergent exhibition tours of crypto art and artist-led tours of their works this week. So we're very much in the contemporary of that. Moving on. Then.
I would love a link to that stuff, because I'm curious in everything, in all of these sort of weird and wonderful things that people are doing and bringing that together. So so I'll have to make a note of that, my pen as well, sort of same color as my talk.
Yeah, and Harrison, if you want to drop a link into the chat at any point, you are more than welcome. We'd love to be able to share that with everyone else. Oster Amundsen asks, she says she's really enjoyed hearing of the artists doing interventions within the game worlds. And are there any favourite recent examples you might have of performance or theatre types and that kind of art in game spaces?
Again, my brain is coming up a little short, but I think I'm really inspired by the work of Angela Washko, and she's not doing those interventions at the moment, but she's done a lot of work in World of Warcraft, doing sort of feminist interventions, but also she formed, I'm going to title this incorrectly, like the World of Warcraft Psychogeographic organization or something similar to that. So I'm really interested in Angela's work and the sort of intervention she's taken into those spaces. And I think in general, sort of artists and practitioners who I know sort of are in around this space, obviously with Everest Pipkin and sort of John Rathman's work. Something as well that I've gone back to, which I used to say, but I realized I never watched, which was This Spartan Life, which was the talk show that was hosted in Halo, sort of back in, I don't know what year, like sort of at the moment there's the talk show that's in Animal Crossing, but actually I find going back and watching This Spartan Life has been really insightful, because I find it a much more compelling experience watching something that's taking place in Halo, because you occasionally have like people coming into their server and trying to shoot the guests, and so you just have this really weird tension, but also a lot of the people they're interviewing. So again, sort of I put the link in the reading list. A lot of the people that they interview are people who are part of communities and artists who are doing work within that space. So there's one where they interview, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, like the Ill Clan, who did a lot of sort of machinima and Quake. And so you've got this sort of like meta experience of experiencing history of people doing work and interventions in video games, whilst also being interviewed and hearing sort of the theory and thoughts around that. So so I really recommend sort of watching This Spartan Life if that's something that you've never watched before. But yeah.
Great. I'm going to squeeze two more in and then we'll bring things to a close. Tom Scullion says, I wonder if as the move from offline to online togetherness becomes more normalized, will we see generosity to experimental forms start to give way to more traditional values re-establishing themselves?
Oh, wait, hang a minute, wait. Could you repeat the last bit?
Yeah. As the move from offline to online togetherness becomes more normalized, will generosity to experimental form give way to more traditional values re-establishing themselves?
I hope not. Like, if I understand it correctly, saying like, is this going to become more and more formalized? Yeah, I don't know sort of how things are going to sort of develop. I'm really conscious of how this sudden surge of interest from people who are new in this space, and I include myself sort of largely within that, impacts the legacy of artists and curators and practitioners who've been working in this space for years, and sort of the potential sort of I think it's incredibly important that we remember and sort of highlight that legacy. And I guess it's also something that's a little bit sort of bitter as well, in a sense of, okay, the point at which you sort of appreciate this experimentation is a point when your hand is forced. It doesn't come sort of naturally. But I hope that that there are sort of changes that sort of the changes that are happening sort of at a grassroots level, I guess, sort of from artists and curators sort of working within this space. does resonate upwards towards sort of, I guess, people who are in charge of funding or in charge of sort of support in different ways of rethinking the way that they value things that are digital experiences. And I think if anything that I felt, one of the things that I feel that has happened in the past couple of months is that for years we have, and rightfully sort of being critical and being very sort of in questioning sort of the digital technologies and digital communication. For many, many years before this, it's been an incredibly sort of negative conversation, and rightfully so, that there's been some horrific things that have happened and happened to people because of different sort of platforms and the lack of sort of consideration of policy in those spaces. But now I think there's something that's reminding us about the benefits, about how it brings us together, and some of the sort of more sort of cliche negative stereotypes of like, stop being in the corner and being on your phone all day. It's like, hey, at the moment, this is how I'm actually socializing with people. This is a good thing. And so I think it's been a nice reminder for me about sort of the benefits of a lot of these spaces and the gentler aspects of them. And there's work to do to sort of unite those aspects. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question or if that was a bit of a rambling, but those are some words.
It was a bit of both. It was great. So the final question then from Rebecca Sinker is, to what extent are you asking, what is this technology software game good for exploring? And do you interrogate the affordances first, or are you discovering new affordances through public events and experimentation?
Maybe a bit of both. I mean, I'm not, it's strange for me because I guess I'm not sort of a games designer, and so I don't normally, I don't necessarily sort of work in that space of thinking about developing or designing games. I'm more sort of looking at sort of translating that work into different contexts. I think it's interesting that sort of you can sort of paint a certain picture or paint a different picture when you look back on the way that you've done things. So when I talk about sort of now play this in a way that we translated that festival and the time that we gave ourselves at the beginning, that when you read it back now, when I recite it back now, it feels like, it was all very considered. There was probably a meeting and some words were written on some post-it notes and put up, and then everything was interrogated about these, whereas actually a lot of the thoughts and a lot of the processes that we went through are actually more sort of gut responses of just knowing like, oh, this is what it is, and that connects to that. And over time, as you do that work and as you iterate, you begin to understand and be able to perhaps contextualize and formalize and actually identify what those aspects were. So I think for me, in the work and the projects that I've done, that it's sort of a little bit of both, of one, being inspired by other people, having curiosity about different experiences, knowing that perhaps things are going to operate in a certain way, but also just being open to just seeing where that work takes me. And I think at the moment, again, a lot of the work that I'm doing is one, sort of the active doing, but then also trying to take time to just sort of read and contextualize that and understand where it actually sits in theory, and sort of and understand sort of where it actually fits into the rest of the world. But yeah, so a little bit of both, I guess, but it never feels quite as considered when I'm doing it. Like, I felt like an idiot when I was putting together a party in a spreadsheet, but people seem to be interested in it, so that's fine.
And even Google Docs themselves are tweeting about you at your parties.
Yeah.
Right?
Who knew Google Docs even had a Twitter account? But wonderful. Thank you. Highlight of my career. Retweeted by Google Docs.
Marie, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to have you speak at the talk today, and I certainly there's some deep questions that have come out of what you've asked. If people want to carry on the conversation with you, we'll put up a slide at the end which has got I think we'll have your social media details on it. You can find Marie at Tigers Hungry on Twitter if the slide doesn't appear. These talks happen every Friday at 1 o'clock, unless there's a bank holiday, but I think we're all gone with those for the time being. You can find out more about them by subscribing to us on Twitter and Instagram at PM Studio UK, or subscribing to the newsletter on our website. Please, if you've got 2 seconds, do subscribe to this YouTube channel and give us a thumbs up. Subscribes and likes help us to spread the word of these stories and the knowledge of our great speakers further around the world. If you have a talk you would like to do, we are always open to suggestions from people who are exploring the worlds of creativity and technology and all the beautiful places where they intersect. You can drop us a line via Twitter and let us know what you'd like to talk about. We're always keen to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching this time. Tell your friends, tell your family, join us again next week, and we'll see you all again soon.